And along those lines of things that like I used to like, but now just like overabundance of the content has made me not enjoy it. The Celtics have been making a lot of moves, and I think we all had a feeling when Tatum got hurt, there was a little bit of an opportunity there. They were always going to have to do some business with the luxury tax, but now that they know that Tatum is out for an extended period of time, there's like no reason now to not just kind of punt and start dishing all these big contracts so that they can get under that apron. And obviously, the two huge ones: Kristaps Porzingis going to Atlanta for George Niang, and among other things, and Jrue Holiday going back, I guess, to Portland for Anthony Simons and other packages. You guys, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the trade. For the purposes of kind of the sports media angle of it, I do think it's interesting from Celtics green teamers. Is there any reaction to a Celtics or Brad Stevens move that isn't this guy's the greatest genius in the world and this is the greatest trade of all time? I always think that that's the most interesting thing. It doesn't matter. I do think I'm not going to pretend like I'm the Anthony Simons, lead scout here, but I do think that the Portland deal in particular was a pretty good return. And Porzingis was always a luxury, not ever a guy that I really considered a fulcrum of their championship contention. He was a bonus to have. But I do think it's funny in the majority of the response to this. Brad Stevens does it again. I don't know. I think that they are good deals, but there's never a thing from the Celtics faithful that's not Trader Danny or Trader Brad has fleeced the NBA once again.
I heard some of this on the radio yesterday, so it made me think. I get where you're coming from. I get where those people. What's been the bad deal though? Like,
No, yeah,
you know what
no,
I mean? So this one, I get the idea of like the green teamer and everything's great, everything's awesome for the Celtics. I understand that. I typically subscribe to the insanity that is that kind of state-run media and how over the top it is when it comes to the Celtics, especially. Um, but like Brad Stevens is a pretty flawless track record when it comes to this sort of stuff. So I do think, like, if you do your job well and you do it for a sustained amount of time, you get the benefit of the doubt until otherwise. And like we've gotten so lost in the sauce of coverage, positive, negative, or anything else that like you can't just have that opinion. And like track record is track record. Like I don't know what else to say. Like so I'm not gonna sit here and pretend to know a whole lot about the returns and things like that. And I would actually even argue completely punting on this season next season might be a little short-sighted considering where the league is going, where the conference especially is going. But for now, I kind of just put blind trust and faith in Brad Stevens, given a pretty pretty spotless track record.
I mean, I'd agree with almost everything you said. Brad Stevens hasn't done anything uh, poorly yet. Like every aspect of being a general manager, I think he's performed well.
Yeah.
The one thing that looking at the return, and again, I'm like you, Ben. I'm not a Anthony Simons truther or a George Niang genius or anything like that. But they both shoot a ridiculous amount of threes, and they both make a lot of their threes. That's what I would say is wrong about this whole thing is like we're gonna have to watch a team that shoots the most threes in the history of basketball again for the third consecutive season because that's what they're gonna be this year. Without Tatum, without really somebody to run their offense, because if it wasn't Tatum, it was Holiday. And now it's on White, and Derek White can run the offense, but also what does he do? He shoots a ton of threes. So for me, looking at the return, it's what, 4 second round picks and then two guys who jack threes. Not going to be a great brand of basketball to watch, but I think they look at it where without our best player for a year, this is how we're going to win games. Like if we get hot, we can beat anybody, and I think they're kind of building it that way. And then with all these picks, I think people who are tapped into the NBA and how these things kind of all lead to one big move, like all the small moves lead to one bigger one. They all think the Celtics are trying to move up into the lottery. And obviously, if they do move up into the lottery, they have to take a big because they don't have like Luke Cornett can't be your starting five. for an entire season. So I would imagine that's what they end up doing. And if they do, and then they have a bunch of guys around Jaylen Brown and Derek White to shoot threes, I don't hate that idea as a stopgap. Like, let's see how far we can get in a conference, like Mike said, that parity is absurd at this point. Like, anybody can come out of the Eastern Conference 1 through 6. I think it's safe to say. So I get where they're coming from. It's not going to be fun to watch most nights, I would argue, but setting yourself up to have a decent, group of players for when Tatum eventually is healthy again, I don't hate that idea.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, the results speak for themselves with Brad. I don't think he's bad or even average. I think he's definitely he has a tremendous track record as an executive. Things tend to work out, however, when you have Jayson Tatum and Derek White. And Derek White is obviously a huge deal he gets credit for. Someone that he managed to bring in and make what I think is the second most important player on a championship team or a championship caliber team last season. So yeah, there is that. And I think that the biggest thing is, not so much like the quality of the players or the package, because like Porzingis, when he played, they were unstoppable. It was like cheat code. And Jrue Holiday was a very important piece. He was a super upgrade to Marcus Smart at that time. And again, from what I know of Simons and Niang, it's not like he just landed, AD and Luka Doncic. But what he gave up to get those guys, and even what he gave up to get Holiday, I think that is more the when I'm talking about the impressive moves that Stevens has made. It's not so much like the talent he brought in. It's that in every case he traded high, or to bring in something that's like, this is going to be a good piece that is going to really complement Tatum and White. And I don't mean to like take it away from Jaylen Brown. Like, Jaylen Brown, I think a lot of people would consider him the second best player on the Celtics. And I think that's probably true, but I still think that the two most important players are White and Tatum, and kind of whatever you put around those two guys, it's going to work out, because those guys are really kind of unicorns in their own right.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing too in all of this is people hate when the Red Sox don't spend money or they make moves to get under the tax, stuff like that. And I'm a part of this as well with the Celtics, where they went from having to pay $540 million in salary and taxes to 280. Like, yeah, man, it's smart. So why would you spend $500 million on a team that isn't going to win a championship, where you can, and this will remain to be seen whether or not they do take the savings and eventually use it in future years, but you save the money, you still give yourself a chance to win, and now theoretically you have a little bit of savings to use in 2026, 2027. Really, what will be your last shots with this core? I mean, once Tatum gets fully healthy from the Achilles, he'll be 29, and all right, you've got 4 or 5 years left with him, and that's your last kind of run with him being a superstar #1 caliber player, in my opinion. So I understand the idea of punting on a year to maybe lengthen the back end of his tenure as your #1 guy.
But I think
I will say
to tee up, Mike, you mentioned, the punting on this year might be a tad aggressive. I mean, especially in the East. Going into this year, Indiana was, considered a nice team, and now they're probably, a major injury away from being, championship caliber team. The Knicks as well. So, I don't know if you wanted to expand or you were about to expand on that, Mike.
I was just gonna say, I think I agree with a lot of what Keagan said, but I will say, and I think this is where the Red Sox thing comes in, is like there's a fine line, or there can be at least, when it comes to professional sports, between like good business and frugality, and like reckless frugality. And I think this is good business because of the Tatum thing, but I do think it probably has to stop here before it does become borderline frugal. And like, I think for a long time before the Tatum injury, even like Porzingis and Holiday, as valuable as they were to a championship team last year, were obviously the guys that were going to get traded. Like, it was almost a fait accompli. Like, we all knew that this was coming. What, the Tatum injury, the dynamic that changes obviously is now Tatum or White, Brown, anyone else on the roster are up for grabs potentially, and even Sharania reported that they're getting a ton of calls about both of those guys. I don't think, based on what we've seen from other players in the past of similar ages coming back and how well they can perform after an Achilles injury, like Kevin Durant's numbers when he came back from Achilles injury are really good, and obviously he's still a major player in the league. There's no need to completely blow this thing up. And
yeah,
from like whatever way you want to look at it, whether it's next season or 3 seasons from now, like the core is still there. And I think it would just be like, if you trade Jaylen Brown, for example, like I'm not the biggest Jaylen Brown fan, but that almost feels like making a deal to make a deal. Like, I'm sure maybe there's something out there where somebody wants to get stupid and it does actually make sense to make that move by the pure definition of what it makes sense from a basketball trade. But I still would think long and hard about that, because I think that those are your 3 guys that you kind of build around. And that's what makes the draft capital or the role players that you get from these, ancillary deals so important, is that you're going to have to spend a ton of money and a ton of that cap to those 3 players. And maybe they decide it ends up having to be 2 players. Maybe it's just Brown and Tatum, and they do trade Derek White because they kind of have to. And I'm not going to sit here and say I'm a cap expert, so maybe that's the direction that they do go. And honestly, like going back to what Ben was saying about the White thing, like I think he's a good player. I think he's a great player. He's an Olympian, like he's an NBA champion. Do we know for sure he's going to be this good when he's not playing on the Celtics? I don't know. So like maybe they do. I know. I feel like I'm speaking out both sides of my mouth, but I wouldn't go crazy with a teardown this summer, because I just think there's still plenty of viability with whatever you want to consider the core.
Yeah, I mean there is a little bit of the cover of their moves with the Tatum situation, because I think if Tatum was not seriously injured, the specter of owner Bill coming in would be a lot more of a shadow, because like it is very significant that there's so much private equity in that thing. And I know we like to complain. I am one of the biggest in complaining about like the NFL, for instance, about all these good old boy owners running daddy's team. But there is an element of it's like it's a family trust. When the Chiefs and the Jets, and the Jets are a bad example, but the Patriots are running their teams with, like as a prestige. But especially like in the NBA, like that private equity money is coming in more and more, and with a cap that's not a hard cap but has some really, really onerous luxury tax limitations. Like the NBA is tailor made for an approach where it's just kind of like, hey, let's cash our revenue sharing model money, for lack of a better term. Let's make it to the playoffs every year. Let's milk this really passionate fan base in Boston and make sure that we do it frugally.
I think for GM,
colluding as the NFL is either. So there's
what's that?
Not nearly as good at it.
They're not as good at colluding either. I mean, that's how the NFL gets by it, as we've seen in the last couple of days. But yeah, sorry, Keagan, go ahead.
No, just the GMs in the NBA kind of know it too, because you see these guys more than any other sport get off of contracts or get out from underneath a player. The Luka Doncic trade is obviously the extreme of it, but if you think about what they did, and insane things needed to happen for it to turn out this way, but they traded a player that they made it about as far as they were going to. If they win a couple more games, obviously they're champions, but they exhausted every option. They did everything they thought they could with him, and they said, screw it. We're gonna take the things that we know we have for 2, 3, 4 more years, and we're gonna just try it a different way. And obviously they end up with the number 1 pick. They're gonna get what many people believe to be a generational player. I know Ben doesn't love talking about college kids generationally or overseas products. 7'5" Frenchman, maybe. You're not picking up what I'm putting down.
I am picking up, but I think Cooper is going to be awesome.
So they get a guy who plays the premier position in the league. He's viewed by almost every scout you could talk to as a guy who's going to be a star within the next 3 years, and they're going to match him with two proven veterans and a team of role players that it's a finals worthy team. We've seen it. We saw it 2 years ago. Obviously, Klay Thompson, is he still there? I don't even know if he's still there, but if he is there,
I think so.
good veteran presence around the two stars that they have, and then obviously all the bigs they have. Like they went from having a good team to having a good team. They're just built completely differently, and the timeline is a lot longer now because it's Cooper Flag. He's on his rookie deal. He'll get that max extension, but now you have 7 years versus I think it was 2 years or 3 years left on Luka's.
I don't have any further Dallas.
I was gonna say,
comment
while you were kind of running through that scenario, though, I was like, the Celtics winning the championship last year certainly changes. I think this may be kind of a no shit thing, but like certainly changes a ton of the calculus, where it's like it's a lot easier to start doing this when you've got the goodwill of a championship still in your back pocket. Like, a lot has fallen right for owner Bill since kind of maybe he just was so shrewd that he knew that all this was coming, but like,
he could tell. Tatum walked in one day and he looked at his Achilles. He was like, "I think that thing's."
Well, but like
we better.
That is the one thing. But I mean,
Dr. Bill,
he knew a lot of this stuff was, the salary cap stuff and the apron stuff was all right there. Like he knew he wasn't gonna have to pay that.
That's why. That's why he had an opportunity to buy the team. Like they weren't selling because they wanted to sell and they just wanted to go enjoy their lives. It was because the dad saw the bill and
was like, "I'm not doing this.
Figure it out. Like you've got 2 years. Figure this thing out," and they did. And
which again
took them
makes it a lot easier.
Months.
Yeah, a lot easier to cash in that chip when you just won another ring. So
And the great thing about the dad, he couldn't care less. If they would have lost in the first round 2 years ago instead of winning the championship, he still would have told Wick, like, "Sorry, kid, that was your last shot at it."
Which would have been sick. Like,
go get me my money.
Him just bullying Wick is kind of fun. Like
it's one of my favorite subplots.
Yeah, it's slightly overplayed probably, but it's like Wick got to pretend that he was, the big swinging dick at the cracker factory, and he's just like, "Actually, no, you're octogenarian father is the one pulling the strings here. The trust fund babies don't grow up into trust fund men. They're still." But Wick's done a nice job. I don't mean that to completely chop him down, but I just like seeing rich people get humbled like that.
Just infantilize Wick Grousbeck. It is great to just be like, you know what? I think today I would like to cash a $7 billion check. I'm just gonna give up my basketball team and I don't know, buy another jet.
We've made a 2,000% ROI here. Let's just
the dynamics of the situation too. Like that guy's in his early 90s. No chance he spends even a fraction of that money. And I like to think he's like, all your brothers and sisters who don't give a shit about this basketball team, let's get them some money. Like I'm not gonna pump everything into your pet project and leave them with less than he maybe feels that they
less
deserve.
than $1 billion each.
Yeah,
I mean, come on, what are we talking about here?
I think that's very funny that he was like,
"Yeah,
you're done. You got your 25 years of me paying all your bills. It's time to grow up."
I hope he tries to spend as much of it he can though before he dies. I hope he just awesome. Like buys like 4 different yachts, a couple
island,
private jets. Yeah.
The unfortunate thing about old white dudes with that kind of money is they just give it to politicians. That's how they spend their money. They're like, "Here's $300 million." So maybe don't spend it all. Maybe.
Well, I mean, this being the bearded white guy with white golf hat podcast. I think you guys are uniquely positioned to talk about this topic.
Well, I would like that money. I'm certainly.
If somebody wants to give me $1 billion, I'll show you exactly how a white guy spends $1 billion.
Yeah. Look, I've always said that Wick Grousbeck's father is a genius, a shrewd businessman. I think he's, I don't know what Keagan's talking about with the political thing. I think he's a philanthropist through and through, a fantastic person who maybe
for like 8 weeks, he had the biggest sale in the history of the NBA, and then the
Feel a little,
Lakers dumped all over that. But
I'd position myself for a little Brewster's Millions. I could
Oh,
spend
that's a
Wick's daddy's money. So.
great reference. Oh man, R.I.P. Richard Pryor.